Welcome to Suffolk Matters, where all of Suffolk County meets the men and women of Suffolk AME. News, opinions, and insights you won't hear anywhere else. Here's your host, the president of New York's largest independent union, Suffolk AME's Dan Levler.
Welcome to another edition of Suffolk Matters on Walk 97.5 and 94.3 The Shark, where Suffolk County meets the men and women of Suffolk AME. News and views you can't hear anywhere else.
So my guest this morning is Senator John Brooks. Senator, thank you for joining us this morning.
My pleasure.
And, we spoke not too long ago. We had touched on a number of issues that were going on. But I just want to recap with you. So it was June when you were here last. And maybe you can kind of catch us up on some things that have happened between June and now.
Not a lot. We got a new governor in that time. We're facing some incredible challenges on the world front right now.
Sure.
I think there's, as a result of the pandemic, our economy was tripped up, I guess we'll say.
Sure.
We've got a lot of people facing some significant economic challenges as a result of what happened from the pandemic. But other than that, it's been quiet.
Right. Yeah, no, I hear you on that. And that's quite a mouthful. A lot of serious stuff going on, and that doesn't change for you day to day. If nothing much is going on, you've got a job to do. If there's a lot going on, you got to deal with that and your job to do, and that's just the way it is.
Well, I think certainly for us, I think the pandemic itself exposed some weaknesses, I guess, with where we are, our ability to respond to some things. And I don't mean that in a critical sense.
Sure.
I think we here on Long Island still have a tremendous challenge associated with taxes in particular.
Yeah.
And I think, the problems we have statewide and nationally, actually, mental health, I think, really has really shown itself to blossom during the pandemic. So there is a lot of things we've got to address right now.
Sure. So last you were on, we were talking about the 911 operators and the first responder bill. Senate Bill 7121. I want to thank you so much for taking all of my frantic calls throughout that whole process. I mean, a lot there. There's a lot there to discuss, but it was a very important issue that we saw as being universal across the state. So some of the AME population, but then folks across the state, and it was great to be able to see that bill was signed into law. And it was done so on the 20th anniversary of 9/11. A little symbolism there, but I know from my folks how they felt about that. But I'm sure you have a broader sense, having come from the fire service and then hearing, being part of a statewide system. I'm sure you've heard some feedback, and I'm wondering, what the response was.
Well, I think what we did is one of the first steps we have to make. We in our state, we're blessed with a lot of great people that do a lot of terrific things and many times unrecognized and ignored. With the pandemic in particular, people were put in hazardous situations all over the place. Sure. We had a shortage of PPE. Which resulted in people using that equipment for longer than they should. We'll leave it there.
Yeah.
We saw increases in costs for fire departments and the rest because you'd use that equipment once and that's gone.
Yes.
And the cleanup we have, and I think we saw that the staffing that we need in certain areas we don't have enough. And when some of those people became sick, we had some big challenges. I think we've had discussions about staffing levels and legislation to mandate certain staffing levels. But one of the questions that come up, and we've been doing a lot of discussions about people providing medical care in different different levels, home care
Sure.
people and the
Yeah.
rest. There's a question of if those people are there anymore.
Mhm.
You know, we lost a lot of people as a result of the pandemic, over 900,000 people across the nation.
Sure.
We had a number of people move on. We saw whole new industries open up with delivery services of different types. And, you know, one of the things I question when we get into these discussions about increasing the salary, which we have to do for certain positions,
Sure.
is whether the people are out there at all right now.
Right.
And it's something we really have to take a good hard look at.
Sure. And, during the pandemic, folks that were considered quote unquote unskilled then became frontline and essential. And now that we're kind of getting through the pandemic, now we want to consider them unskilled again. But we saw this country shut down without those folks. And something I've been talking about recently, if you believe that a service should exist and the person providing that service shouldn't make a living wage, to me, that's laughable. Right? You say we need, and I want to get into that a little bit later in the conversation, specifically talk about Starbucks.
I got some ideas in that area, so I think it's a good thing to talk about.
But, and not to blindside you, but I know there's been some conversations regarding Tier 6 when it comes to public employees and any relief, anything that makes it more palatable to take the job, because we're seeing in Suffolk County, we're seeing hundreds of people pay money, take a test, pass that test, be hireable, get a letter saying we want to hire you, and they all refuse. Not like, we could only get 10 people and we needed 15. Nobody. So there are reforms that are going to be needed, and I think the state is going to be a partner with the county and, associations like mine in trying to figure out these problems and get folks meaningful compensation and make them feel valued at work.
I had this very discussion basically yesterday with another group on the concerns about Tier 6. I think we understand, that was something that was put together with an objective, and the objective may have been very short-sighted. And I think we've got to recognize, the whole idea of having a pension in the end is that somebody has a financial package that will allow them to financially survive in retirement, oversimplified.
Sure.
And when we cut all kinds of things out of it, all of a sudden we have a new problem. And one of the arguments I always made addressing the concept of unions in particular, so many people the jobs that they have don't include a retirement package. And for many people, particularly as the economy is what it is and you don't have a chance to save, or the savings that they had were lost as a result of some kind of financial situation.
Sure.
They now become people in need.
Yes.
And it's one more person that the government has got to provide some of the necessities of life to because they don't have the financial stuff. So I think it's if when we grow up, if you will, as a society, we're going to realize that part of our obligation is to make sure everybody's prepared for when they're going to retire, and they have what they need. So I think Tier 6 is something that has to be looked at, and revisions are going to have to be made to that.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's something that's, I think, important for people to realize, when we talk about pensions and folks that don't have pensions, they picture these ginormous six-figure payouts and whatever, and this is survival money, right? We're talking on average the payout 30, 35,000, maybe 40 on average, right? So there are some folks that skew the numbers because they were compensated higher throughout their career, and now their retirement amount is more. Newspapers like to sensationalize those details, but the fact of the matter is we're not talking much. And the public employee works at a reduced salary because of these pensions concerns. So,
well, I think you take a job. Everybody takes jobs for certain reasons, and often people think towards retirement and understanding they're going to have a package that will provide the health benefits and other things that they need. and they understand that they don't get the six figures maybe somebody else does, but when they retire, they're taken care of, if you will.
They can keep the lights on. Yeah. So, well, speaking of partnership with the state and looking at issues that can impact the taxpayers as a whole, we talk about the concept of Tier 6 and retirement considerations for everyone, union or not. Another way to maybe help out fiscally each individual taxpayer is to do something like the EMS Cost Recovery Act. And, again, from my perspective, I'll just say for me, I see this as recovering money for the taxpayer and not costing them money per se. But I'd like to get your thoughts on, what is the bill? What does it do?
So we passed the bill in the Senate. It's still pending in the Assembly. But one of the things I requested and was able to get done was the bill has been added to the Senate's one House bill budget. So we're going to have an opportunity to possibly get this done through the budget process. Now, to what you said is exactly right. We're in a situation, much of the state makes use of volunteer fire departments to handle their emergency rescue calls. And by statute right now, they are not eligible to recover their costs. Throughout the state, all the other agencies do. The volunteer ambulance companies can do that. The county and police ambulances that are out there can do that. Hospitals ambulances can do that. The private sector can do that.
Right.
The pandemic was an eye-opening experience to an extent. We saw a reduction in ambulance calls and an increase in ambulance calls. The I want to go to the hospital and be checked out calls kind of went down because people didn't want to be near a hospital during the pandemic.
Right.
And the people that thought they might have the virus went up. And those calls were a different call. You really had to take protective measures. So the folks that were responding to those calls were in the PPE that is required. And after the use was disposed of, the length of the calls became longer, the time at the hospital was longer, the cleanup and longer, and the cost went up. So the fire departments, and historically, obviously, the fire departments were initially formed to provide fire protection. And I remember back in the 70s, we were getting more and more rescue calls because at the time the police ambulances weren't available. And we kind of rolled out the EMS stuff. We got the EMT program started and everything else. Fire departments were absorbing those costs. And now, as the numbers come up and other expenses, and I was talking to somebody just a little bit ago in Nassau County in particular for the areas that provided water service from New York American Water, they had a tremendous charge for fire hydrants. All this stuff was driving the taxes up. As the ambulance calls are growing, the fire departments are trying to guess what's going to happen. And when you get something like the pandemic with what happened in volume and cost, that's unbudgeted. And for the fire departments, that becomes a pass along to the taxpayers in form of a tax increase or a cut in services in another area. We all, not all of us, but most of us have insurance coverage. Every health insurance policy covers for ambulance services. There's no reason not to let the fire departments make that collection. That gives the fire departments the opportunity to recover the costs they have to pay. So if you look at a volunteer ambulance company during the pandemic and a fire department, the increased call activity for the volunteer ambulance company is covered by the fact that they're recovering for each call. The fire department could not, and they are effectively absorbing those costs. So it is just what we said. It's an opportunity to recover costs. It's an opportunity for the fire districts to have additional revenue to work with, to avoid, in many cases, the potential for a tax increase. For areas where they have a very, very high volume of ambulance and rescue calls, they can consider putting on a paid staff if they think that's going to help what's happening. Because the other thing that's happening is it's tougher and tougher to volunteer now with the demands on everybody. And the lengths of the calls have dramatically increased over the years. And then when you get to the hospitals, if it's crowded, you're sitting there. I mean, a couple of years back, there was an ice storm or something one day. Well, we went to Nassau County Medical Center for the call. We were the 23rd ambulance in line to get in. That's how many calls came in. So that kind of stuff can happen. Mm-hmm. So I think this bill belongs in the budget because it is financial. It can provide an estimated $100 million in tax relief and recovery. And I think it's what we should be doing.
Well, again, when the insurance companies are basically building this into their cost, when they charge a rate to a ratepayer saying these are the things we cover, but then they never have to pay that portion of the bill. I mean, that's basically pocketed money. In a sense. And to be able to recover that, I think, as you say, it helps the budgeting process. It helps you with recruitment and retention of people providing these services. Yep. And I think in a very real way, it's a means to increase or maintain services. So.
Yeah, it really is. And it is a situation where, using the pandemic again, nobody saw that coming. You didn't know what it was going to be. You didn't realize the expenses that were going to be associated with equipment and PPE and all of the rest. It takes the guesswork out of some of this.
Right.
You're going to be paid for what's happening. You're going to recover, I should say, for what's happening.
Yeah. So has this been done in any other state?
It's done all over the country.
Basically, right?
New York State is the one state that's not doing it.
Yeah, and I don't know if there's a good reason. I mean, I can point to reasons I'd speculate why, but, I can't say that I found a good reason.
It was done as part of something 20-something years ago. But you know what? Let's fix it. Mm-hmm. Instead of pointing fingers, let's make the logical correction and move forward.
So, you mentioned this being as part of the budget process, and, I guess that opens the door to talk about the budget in general. I mean, it's state budget. It is many, many, many lines of items to consider. But what's your take right now on how budget season's going, how
the budget process, so everybody understands, goes through phases. Mm-hmm. Each of the houses, the state Senate and the state Assembly, do their budget. The governor provides her preliminary budget in this case, and after 30 days, any amendment to that budget. The Senate and the Assembly put together what's called their one-house budget, which have been completed and now starting to be reviewed. We'll go down and work with the Senate, the Assembly, and the administration to try to come up with a budget, and then we'll have the final discussions on the budget to bring that forward with the objective of having the budget in place by April 1st.
Right.
So we got the one-house budgets in, and now we're starting to review each other's budget, if you will, to see what's common in the budgets, where are the challenges, the differences, the ideas. Part of it is agreeing how much money is available to spend to begin with.
Right.
And then setting our priorities. So that's where we are now, and the discussions are different from item to item. Right.
Sure. Yeah. So for you personally, what type of items are a priority?
For me, the ambulance billing now is one because we have that in there. I am very, very concerned with taxes here on Long Island.
Sure.
No surprise to anyone that taxes are too high. I do have a proposal that is not going to be into the budget, but I think is critically important. And I believe we should be capping residential property taxes for funding education at 50% of the total school district spending. We fund education in our state oversimplified three ways. One is by state aid, which is money that comes from the state and basically delivered making use of formulas.
Right.
One is commercial property taxes, and that's where the commercial property within a given school district contributes to the educational, and the other is residential property taxes. We have become, in the state and in Long Island in particular, excessively over-dependent on residential property taxes.
Sure.
In many, many school districts, we're funding in excess of 70 and 80% of the cost of education solely by the homeowners, based on the assessed value of the house. We've decided that the value of your house
is your ability
to pay. That's not the case.
No.
And we know certainly for seniors who bought houses, say, 50 years ago, just for a number, those houses have appreciated tremendously.
Yes.
Those houses are not affordable to them today if they were going to try to buy it.
Absolutely not. Yeah.
Their wallet is not reflective of, say, that $800,000 house that they're living in. So if we turn around and we say the maximum you're going to use property taxes is 50%,
right,
that would take a total funding statewide of $1.4 billion.
Mm-hmm.
But in some school districts here on Long Island, for example, it would cut property taxes by 30% for schools. We have to do that.
Yeah.
So we didn't get that in the budget. We're working on it. We're putting some exhibits together. After the budget's closed, we're going to be coming out and asking the public to get on this bill.
Sure.
There is funds to make up that difference. We have an obligation to make sure every student in this state has a quality education, and it shouldn't differ based on the community they live in or the financial condition of their parents.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if we're in a situation where we can fund half of it for everybody, and in some cases more, but a minimum of half, or the burden on the homeowner is half, a couple things happen. First, it lowers the cost of housing. If you cut your property taxes by 20%, that's real money.
Yes.
It makes it more likely that people are going to be able to build housing.
Right.
Because, again, that big tax number is removed from the situation. I did some work with Marty Cantor the last couple of weeks on that. We looked at, we use Seaford as an example at which I live. Seaford would receive, in this bill, a $12.4 million reduction in property taxes. Marty talked about that. Then he did an analysis the week after of what the fiscal impact of that would be to the community, and his estimate is about $24 million. Now think about this. If we're in a situation where we're going to cut taxes $1.4 billion, we're putting back into the economy $1.4 billion.
Sure are.
Those for rent signs and for sale signs on the businesses will start to come out, and grand opening signs will come up.
Yeah.
This is a way that we reduce the cost. We reduce the cost of home ownership. We put money back in the economy to get it moving again. And we make it fairer across the board to fund education. Again, how can half the cost or more be coming just from the homeowners for one reason? Because you have a house.
Right. And, I know the comptroller's office does an analysis of different school districts throughout the year and whatever else. But in terms of oversight on the spending and whatever else, I'm not entirely sure all of the mechanisms that could be in place are in place. And not that anybody's trying to do anything bad, but if there's a better way to do things that's a cost savings, well, maybe you can motivate finding that better way by reducing the budget.
There's a number of things that we can do, and I have a lot of ideas that would take up 3 of these shows to do it in. Mm-hmm. Realistically, we don't have a control mechanism in with some of the school spending, I should say.
Right.
And some communities, based on the wealth within the community, they can put together some significant packages. But, our obligation, I think, is to make sure the system is fair.
Sure.
And when you're asking communities to fund 70 and 80% of the cost of education, and, in Seaford, as an example, we have very limited commercial property tax base.
Mm-hmm.
The revenue that's coming in is, round numbers now, $3,000 a student from that. The revenue that comes in from the state aid is roughly $5,000 a student. And the course being paid by the homeowners in property taxes is roughly $20,000 a student. That's an absolute imbalance.
It's absolutely imbalanced.
And we have to change it.
Yeah.
So that's what this bill is about. That's what my effort after the budget is passed, because we couldn't get it in the budget. And, Long Island is highly overtaxed, but other areas in the state are the same way.
Right.
If we put that layer in, 50%,
Right.
that's a start.
Yes.
And then go forward. And if you using the example that I had, if you had a tax bill that came and showed that your taxes would just relieve 30%,
Right.
that's a big deal.
Right. That's a new fence.
Yep.
That's some yard work that you didn't necessarily get to, something you're going to do in your house, a vacation, there are many options that, folks
And
with a little bit of relief.
Unfortunately, for
like
some
that.
people, it's your ability to keep the house.
Also, for sure.
It's there for the seniors. The seniors in particular, they work their whole lives. I've talked to some that had the opportunity to sell the home they lived in and move into a condo that was senior, and then see a dramatic tax increase to the point that they can then not afford that. That's wrong.
I know. Yeah.
So we got to fix it.
That I definitely look forward to speaking to you again on after this budget process is over. I think that there is, and I think you said there's a lot more quote unquote meat on the bones for this worth discussing. I think people are going to be very interested in this as a concept to be able to save a little bit of money and maybe balance that system out. Speaking of budget, I guess things worth noting, or at least things that are semi on my radar. Having the ability for localities to set a tax rate without having to go up to Albany, right? That's one of the pieces in the budget, that there's maybe a 4% local sales tax that can be set.
Yep.
And then, with tax in mind, there's also, some people are really excited and some people couldn't care less and other people really hate it. But this whole cannabis thing is happening and there's potential revenue there. And hopefully that potential revenue can go into expanding services and, creating jobs and really, moving things along at a time of economic recovery.
Well, I mean, the cannabis situation, there was a high level of interest across the state in making that available. To oversimplify it, the way the legislation is written, it gives local control and whether that's going to be sold in a given area or not. And then there'll be revenue based on what happens. The potential for the revenue, and I think probably the greatest example is the betting situation.
Sure.
What we saw, I mean, obviously we had the Super Bowl coming in, but what happened up front, that's money that the state picks up. People wanted to be involved in activities. Some of the people were involved in some of those activities other ways.
Yes.
But that's revenue that we can use to drive some of these costs down.
Right.
The cannabis, I think I have concerns about our ability to identify, for example, people who are driving vehicles
I am
under the influence and rest.
And at work, right?
So yeah, we've got to make sure we implement this program correctly and we monitor what's going on to take the abuses out, and then see what happens. But it is a way to help fund things at the same time too.
And I feel like maybe I'm opening a can of worms in that I might talk too much on this issue, but I know you were recently involved in a you joined with Long Island Federation of Labor. In support of the Starbucks unionization effort in Massapequa Park. Yep. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that. Now I'm going to keep silent on it because I have a lot to say.
Okay. We did go over there with the folks. I think, and this kind of goes back to where we started with the discussion of pensions.
Yeah.
You know, it's not feasible for most people to purchase individually certain types of benefits and services to protect themselves.
Right.
And to an extent in our country, corporations have picked those things up over time: pension, health insurance, vacation time, etc. It's hard for a mom and pop store with 3 employees to do that, obviously.
Right.
But when we look at a chain like Starbucks or some of the others, that is something they can do.
Yeah.
And I think that is at the end of the day a responsibility a corporation should have. They have a responsibility to their customers and their employees both. So I think reasonable benefit programs should be made available. You know, if you're running any business, you want your employees to be healthy, right?
Yes.
Well, if they start to get sick, you want them to be able to get doctors so they can come back in. If they don't have that, that presents a problem. We all realize in life we have incidents that come up, family responsibilities, other things, and you need to take some time off sometimes to take care of something. If you don't have that, you have to lose the job, or the person is coming to the job worrying about some other situation, not doing the work well. Sure. So I think the fact that Starbucks is not a small operation, right?
Right.
And I think they should be in a position of helping their employees with some of those benefits. And the only way the employee gets a voice in that process, in today's world at least, is to organize and have someone represent them. So, I support what was going on there. The only thing I would say at that, I was probably the only one that didn't get a cup of coffee because I drink tea, But other than that, I think that was important.
Yeah. Again, you're talking about a corporation that's increased its costs to the customers, right? So what you buy at their store is now more expensive, but they have record profits. Mm-hmm. And that's a corporation that does it. There are many corporations that do that. I am shutting up on the issue. I want to thank you so much for joining me today. Our guest, Senator John Brooks. John, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
And to our listeners, we'll speak to you next week.